Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's I4C webinar on Article 6, Opportunities and Challenges in Africa. This webinar is brought to you in collaboration with Eastern Africa Alliance and West Africa Alliance on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance. Before we begin, I'd like to go over some of our housekeeping rules. Please do make sure you mute your audio and turn off your video. You can participate in our live poll in the first few minutes and let us know where you're joining from. If you have any questions, please submit them in the WebEx chat panel, and you can also view the WebEx chat panel for any helpful information from the host and panelists today. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on the I4C website. If you're sharing on social media, please use the hashtag #InnovateForClimate. And now I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Usman Falsar to provide some opening remarks and overview for today's discussion. Usman, over to you.
Hello? Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. My name is Usman Falsar, coordinator of the West African Alliance on Carbon Market and Climate Finance. I'm very delighted to open this virtual workshop co-organized by the East and West African Alliances on Carbon Markets and Climate Finance on Article 6 opportunities and experiences in Africa. So, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank the organizers and the participants of this I4C event this year, despite this difficult context of COVID-19, because they are giving us the opportunity to maintain the dynamic and momentum that we, market and non-market negotiators from West and East Africa, have created the past 2 years under the UNFCCC process on the basis of a continuous consultation and cooperation between parties from both developed and developing countries. Dear participants, as you all may know, Article 6 of the Paris Agreement underpins the growing interest of parties to cooperate with one another in implementing their climate actions and meet their NDC targets in a more efficient and ambitious way. However, COP25 did not deliver the anticipated missing piece to the Paris regime rule book defining the modalities of the market-based aspect of Article 6. In the absence of guiding rules on Article 6, pilots and readiness activities become a necessity for developing an attractive and credible international post-CDM carbon market and include participation of the African continent. Countries in Eastern and West Africa are keen to participate in cooperative approaches with partners countries to implement mitigation actions to meet or enhance their NDC ambition. That's why we have formed alliances to promote participation of East and West African countries in these activities. Some Article 6 pilots are already under development between African countries, for example, in Senegal, in Ghana, in Rwanda, Kenya, Nigeria, and Cote d'Ivoire, and developed countries like Switzerland, Sweden, Norway, Japan, etc. But today, our alliances and its member countries wish to share experiences and lessons learned through participating in Article 6 pilot activities, particularly in terms of discuss this subject. We have the chance today to have on the panel a large variety of practitioners from both East and West Africa and Europe, and my colleague Bianca Ishangi, coordinator of the East African Alliance on Carbon Markets, who is doing of negotiations. So Bianca, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Usman, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. This wouldn't be possible without the collaboration of the West Africa Alliance and the I4C team. So thank you once again. Welcome everybody to this session. And just to reiterate what Usman has said, that a lot is going on to prepare the countries for Article 6. And really what we're doing here today is answering this question, but from many different perspectives. So we're going to have representatives from government and from private sector, and from approaches that are actually on the ground working currently as we speak. Therefore, our distinguished panel of speakers today are 5 speakers from East and Western Africa and 1 from Europe. And I'll just introduce them very briefly so that we can know whom we'll be speaking to today and whom you can direct your questions to. So from government, we have 2 representatives. Our first will be Rachel Boti from the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development in Côte d'Ivoire. So she is the West Africa MRV Program Coordinator in charge of carbon markets and carbon pricing initiatives. She's a member of the CDM Working Group of Negotiators on Climate Change. She specializes in environment management with experience in low carbon development issues, project design and management. She's also the CDM DNA in Côte d'Ivoire and the co-chair for the CPLC Africa Working Group. She is currently the lead coordinator of the Transparency thematic line in the West African Alliance on carbon markets and climate finance. Moving to Eastern Africa, our government representative today will be Dr. Anno Mambia from the National Environment Management Authority in Kenya. So she is the Chief Compliance Officer and Climate Change Coordinator at NEMA, and she has 17 years of experience in environmental management, 11 years of which has been involved in in-depth research and working experience in the climate change field of expertise in climate change mitigation, adaptation, carbon markets, international climate change negotiations, and policy formulation. She's also the DNA Kenya and a mitigation expert on the UNFCCC roster of experts. Currently, she's the chair of the Eastern Africa Alliance on carbon markets and climate finance. Moving on to our private sector representative, we have Patrick Collas today, representing Climate Care. So Patrick originates and oversees the direction and delivery of Climate Care's projects. Leading a team of carbon experts out of Nairobi, Kenya, he drives strategic project development for voluntary and compliance buyers, as well as the team's contribution to climate change mitigation action and policy work. Having operated in the EU ETS and managed voluntary carbon portfolios, he can advise on applicable financing mechanisms and on global regulatory framework for sustainable energy, land, and resource management. Patrick holds postgraduate degrees in economics and sustainability. From West Africa today, we have Mr. James Ogunleye, representing Carbon Limits Nigeria. So James has 15 years of broad experience in energy, climate change, and project development in Africa. He has special expertise in carbon markets and project development in the areas of rural electrification, captive and microgrid energy solutions. He has worked extensively on MRV of projects in energy, manufacturing and transport sectors, contributed to the mitigation action plan for the ONG sector of Nigeria, and has also been involved in several capacity building workshops on climate issues in Nigeria, Gabon, and Ghana. He was a team lead in the CDM registration and monetization of carbon credits from a gas flare reduction project, which was the biggest project in Nigeria. He is currently the managing director of Carbon Limits Nigeria. And lastly, we have Mr. Michael Brenwald, who will be representing Click Foundation today. He is the director of carbon procurement at Click Foundation. He's responsible for the procurement of appropriate GHG mitigation activities under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. He holds a master's degree in economics and business administration with a focus on international economics and finance from the University of Zurich in Switzerland. Previously, Mr. Brenwald worked for First Climate and Credit Suisse as a senior advisor to the international public and private investors. Thank you, speakers, for joining us today once again. And we'll start off this panel with questions directed to the government representatives. So I'll start off with Dr. Omabia, who is on the panel today. Oh, just a slight reminder, change of plan to everybody. So we have government representatives with us here today, but they are also negotiators, and there are meetings this week going on with the UNFCCC, so they will need to leave this meeting early. So we have a Q&A session planned at the end for all the speakers, but kindly I'll request while the speakers from the government give their presentations, kindly direct your questions because they will leave early. So our first speaker is Dr. Anna Mambia. So I'd like to pose the question that based on your past and current country experiences, what successes and challenges have you experienced in preparation of implementation for Article 6 activities? You have the floor.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and greetings from Kenya. Thank you, Bianca, and all the organizers for setting up this meeting. And thank you for the introduction too. With regards to the preparatory activities that have taken place in Kenya so far in terms of experiences that we have had with regards to Article 6, one, I would categorize the successes in terms of technical, policy, legislative, and also negotiations. Kenya is a signatory to the Convention and to the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol, and has actively participated in the Clean Development Mechanism. And the successes of the Clean Development Mechanism for the country have largely contributed to the interest in the Article 6 as it shapes up under the Paris Agreement. And therefore, in terms of the successes in terms of the technical, since the ratification of the Paris Agreement, Kenya set up interministerial or interagency, I would call it interagency because we have both government, private sector, and non-governmental participants, an interministerial technical committee on Article 6. And this particular committee served as a very good platform to help build up understanding, technical understanding, and also political understanding towards Madrid negotiations last year. We had lots of online capacity building and physical meetings as a nation to be able to understand this particular article and also actively engaged in the negotiations in Madrid. Policy-wise, I would say as a country, Kenya is among the few countries in the world that has legislated climate change. We have a Climate Change Act that provides, whose overall goal is to lead the country on a low carbon, climate resilient pathway, development pathway, and in that regard provides various measures to participate in green growth or green development. At the National Treasury has set in place a climate finance policy that provides for measures on how carbon markets can operate. And this again is a policy that will also guide our negotiations even as we prepare to participate in development of the rule book for Article 6. Further, we are in the final stages of updating our NDC, and it also has provisions for the carbon market. And the updating process provided also another platform to engage actively with regards to the understanding of Article 6, both the market and non-market provisions. So I don't know whether I should stop there or also share the challenges therein and our experiences so far. Thank you.
Yes, you do have a few minutes to expound on challenges.
The challenges, of course, are diverse, and I think I'll categorize them in terms of the user of the Article 6. As government, for us, we are keen to see the rule book in place to address the key challenges that will enable achievement of our national climate change aspirations. We have a National Climate Change Action Plan 2018-2022 currently under implementation, a National Adaptation Plan We have sector-based climate change strategies and action plans, including, for example, the climate smart agriculture and all that. And all those have potentials for market mechanisms depending on the sector and the priorities of the sector. Of course, for climate smart agriculture, the priority for the country's adaptation, but there are also possible mitigation co-benefits that would come through that. Within the forestry sector, Kenya is a REDD+ nation, if I could call that, and we are in the readiness process, and therefore the forestry sector would wish to see how the rule book pans out for the forestry sector. For the energy sector, of course, from the clean development mechanism, Kenya CDM projects were more in the energy generation, renewable energy use in terms of energy efficiency and otherwise. And therefore, the challenges from the government side is to ensure that we have a rule book that is able to meet the needs of all these sectors. And for the CDM project participants, as the second category, is the uncertainty that the unavailability of the rule book as it now presents to them. That is, will their CDM project activities transition the Paris Agreement, and how will that transitioning be? Are the activities moving as a package together with the certified emission reductions that have not been traded? And for the projects that whose term is ending on 31st of December 2020, then what happens to their project, because the KP is also coming to an end. And so those are some of the challenges, and we look forward to the current dialogues and, of course, the upcoming executive board of the CDM meeting to unlock some of these things. And, of course, the already existing methodologies, what happens to them? The additionalities, how will that be done? Generally, the uncertainties for the African group of negotiators translate to our uncertainties as a country with regards to Article 6, and we hope that that will be unlocked. In terms of our experiences, of course, a lot of interest from project participants who would wish to possibly be early birds in gaining from the Article 6 so as not to miss the bus, like what happened in the CDM, so lots of readiness activities. And we hope that collectively, both the technical challenges, financial, and capacity building shall gradually be unlocked. As a region, Kenya is a member of the East African Alliance, as it has been mentioned here. And this year, we've had quite a number of online meetings on carbon pricing and the Article 6 itself, the negotiation status, and nationally as a country, we had a scope workshop to unpackage all these things. And we hope that going forward, we shall be able to unlock the challenges that are nationally unlocked, and the international challenges shall be unlocked in due course to give the confidence required for the right market signal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Amambia, for expounding on that. I'm sure, like the listeners have taken away, there are a lot of issues concerned, with the different sectors, how they'll be captured, transition of activities, and there's a lot relying on what will actually happen in Article 6 moving forward. Kindly ask your questions. I think Dr. Amambia will be with us until 4:30. So if there are any questions, kindly put them in the chat. But with that, I would like to move on to our next speaker, who will be from the private sector. I'd like to ask Mr. James Ogunleye to the floor. And for him, the question I'd pose is now from a project developer perspective, with experience in CDM in West Africa, what opportunities exist there for the private sector moving forward, and what challenges do you see as we move into Article 6? James, you have the floor. As participants will have 7 minutes. Go ahead.
Right. Thank you very much, Bianca. It's nice to be here. Again, my name is James Ogunleye, as you've rightly introduced. I see quite a lot of cross issues from what Dr. Mambia had just mentioned, which might imply that I might not need to repeat it, but I'll just be specific to things as it applies to us here in Nigeria and from our experience. Yes, what are the opportunities? Permit me to just first of all start with the challenges, and looking at the challenges, that we've seen in the past. In the days of CDM, you know, it was very, very tough getting people to understand what the concept is all about, the awareness, the understanding of how this works, to even get the industries to commit to this kind of scheme was quite very tough. That also reflects in the number of projects that you see, particularly from Nigeria. You have just 12 projects that are large scale. And of the 12 projects, one was down, meaning rejected. And it's also clear that it is one of the pitfalls of not understanding how the market works in the past. So if you put all this together, you see an issue that is largely related to people not even understanding what it is. And also, by the time we get into it, there was also the issue of data, not having enough data. So it was a challenge that a lot of projects had to go through, which are indeed climate projects that could have been beneficial, but it never happened. So if you then translate that to what can be the opportunity, then the opportunity is that over the years, the MRV process has been built, what you call the now people are aware of how to monitor, how to report and verify. Again, it's not like this is completely institutionalized in all our sectors. There are still quite a lot to be done in this regard, but it puts opportunity going forward as you go into Article 6, that there is a need to then, for those of us in the private sector, to work closely with the public sector, especially the Ministry of Environment, where we have a Department of Climate Change domicile. So if we have to do anything, it has to be that we try to work hand in hand with them, which is exactly what we're doing at the moment. It's nice to mention that already you have the ministry on the driver's seat and carrying along the private developers along with them to ensuring that we are part of trying to build the MRV process within the institutions, trying to be part of the NDC revision work, and all other activities that is very, very vital. And that sort of gives a lot of opportunity to build capacity, but also to be able to look into the future as to how do we not just come into Article 6 and remain blank again, just like it was in the days of CDM. And you have to also see, or you need to also be aware that one of the things that we from the private sector is looking at the moment is also the fact that the Article 6, the rule book, all these things, as we get into them, there's a need to get to this position where we can also begin to build capacity of people as to how this will work. What are the differences between what it is now and what it was before? I mentioned earlier that we have 12 projects in Nigeria, 11 still registered, 1 is rejected. But I tell you, the truth is that out of this 11, only 1 project was able to really get into carbon credits among the large scale. Other projects that were able to get carbon credits are the cookstove. So you ask yourself that, what then is the incentive that you'll be able to encourage people with? It is a challenge, and that's going forward is something that we needed to be the early birds here to be able to get sure that we understand what the process is all about, how does it work, and get the sectors that we have identified already in the NDC prepared ahead of time as to where we're going. And then lastly, I want to mention that for us here, one of the things we see also as opportunities is the current upstream emission reduction, which is taking place in the EU. In the EU space, you have the upstream emission reduction, which allows you to be able to trade emission reduction within oil and gas projects. And some of the projects during the CDM days, which couldn't make it, they were registered at that time, but couldn't get credits, are now brought back into the picture and are currently in the process of trying to acquire these credits. We see this as opportunity. We're playing along with in this process, and we're already looking at more projects within the oil and gas to see those that can be pushed forward within this scheme. But largely, we're looking forward to the evolving of the Article 6, and we're hoping that this will be something that we can create synergy between the Eastern and Western Africa, between the private and the public sector, to be sure that we can be upfront in terms of information dissemination and be able to carry our people along. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James, and for expanding on the work that you're doing and the experiences that you've had. And that's from West Africa. So now moving on to Eastern Africa, I'd like to ask Mr. Patrick Kolas, similarly to what I asked James in terms of his perspective as a project developer in Eastern Africa and with a significant portfolio that you work with, what opportunities and challenges are you facing as you move towards Article 6? Hello, James. Hello, Patrick. We can't hear you.
Hello, can you hear me now? Mic check.
Yes, we can. Yes.
Excellent. Sorry about that. Very good. And yeah, thank you for having me on this panel. I think we all strive here to catalyze ambition, and the private sector will definitely continue to play a key role. And for us as a product developer with a Pan-African and in fact a global vision, really, our objective is to uncover opportunities to raise funding for mitigation activities. And Article 6 provides us with three options. 6.8, which is reasonably well-known, well-trodden, and mature climate financing mechanism. And at times it can offer us an opportunity to partner with authorities, with public funding bodies, with local NGOs. But this is not so innovative or controversial, so I will not spend too much time on that. I like to talk, on the other hand, about Articles 6.2 and 6.4, which really are refurbished versions of things that we've seen before, fundamentally, and things that we at Climate Care have already been doing for some time. For example, delivering emission reductions to sovereign governments under a Kyoto target to the end of the current period, to the end of next month, actually. And of course, now we have to deal with a twist because we need to navigate the issue of carbon ownership in a world where under Paris, everyone will want to stake a claim for the mitigation outcomes. So on the compliance and the regulated side, or really quasi-compliance now, because we're moving from mandatory to voluntary targets. But when we see sovereign entities and parties looking to acquire internationally transferred mitigation outcomes for 6.2 transactions, we can see that they're not typically interested in projects that are in sectors not covered by host countries and DCs, and this is a reasonable position since it would create outcomes without international oversight and sometimes in Africa in particular without host country governance that can provide a rigorous framework outside of the NDC. So for us as a project developer, we do want to focus on those sectors that are covered to begin with, and having passed that initial qualification hurdle, typically what we'll see is that the main challenge and the essential piece of the puzzle will be to discussing corresponding adjustments with host countries, because without those, of course, transactions cannot occur under 6.2, as you know. And frankly, that can be challenging for the private sector at the moment. Having discussed corresponding with several governments in and outside Africa, what I can see is some sort of inertia for the time being until at least two events occur. One is that host countries in Africa finalize their NDC updates or their second contribution to the UNFCCC. And otherwise, without those, host countries do not have visibility on baselines, do not have visibility on mitigation policies, and the path to meeting their unconditional NDC target, and therefore the risk of non-compliance with their unconditional NDC target may be too high for them to agree to give away some of the mitigation outcomes occurring on their soil, and that's fair enough. And so it means that the private sector, and we may decide to focus on projects that are going to be implemented in LDCs, where unconditional targets and the pressure to meet them can sometimes be lower, and where countries are more favorable to the idea of providing corresponding adjustments. The second event would be that, of course, Article 6 text is finalized, that corresponding adjustment rules for Article 6.4 and the successor of these are known, that rules around share of proceeds are known, that rules around overall mitigation of global emissions are known, so that once the framework is in place, scenarios can be established, and ministries can commit to corresponding adjustments. In the meantime, there's a bit of a limbo. And so again, there's an opportunity for the private sector to focus on mitigation activities that may have a relatively higher average cost of abatement, as these will potentially be seen by host countries as more attractive. And also focus on activities that can provide technology and expertise transfer. And also, and this is key in Article 6, which mentions environmental integrity, activities that can provide the dissemination of sustainable behaviors and practices in country, which again can be seen as more favorable by host country government. But of course, these higher levels of abatement mean that you create a situation where you have a higher price expectation for the carbon asset, and for the acquiring party and the Itmo buyer. You also need to align with these parties' own expected average cost of abatement and path to meeting its NDC internally and with international cooperation. So I've heard suggested that some countries, host countries, are looking for partial volumes of mitigation outcomes that might solve some of that problem if they also provide backing, financial backing for projects. But at the end of the day, we are working with parties on the design of Article 6 pilot transactions and working on addressing these points, and also ultimately ensuring governmental infrastructure readiness for accounting and inventory management. And James mentioned this institutionalization is very important. And the integration of data, of government data, into baseline setting and MRV as well at the project level. And perhaps this is something that Michael will talk more about. And another thing is how Article 6 is, for the private sector, affecting the voluntary carbon market and the interaction with the voluntary carbon market, which has been a source of
1 moment, Patrick, thank you.
Significant funding into projects at the local level. Again, the voluntary carbon market will continue to play a key role in filling the financing, timing, and ambition gaps that are created by lower than expected NDCs. And it might mean that it continues to operate outside of the Paris Agreement, and working with corporations and other stakeholders to ensure that the issues of double counting are being raised and being discussed and are ultimately avoided. And at the end of the day, uncertainty about claims and the ability to generate financing mean that project developers in the private sector need to model financial sustainability over time ex carbon, and they must develop projects within a coherent sectoral framework with climate, social, health, and economic benefits. And I think in this new Paris age, in this new paradigm, this private sector needs to immerse themselves more in local climate policy and engage with host governments to identify high mitigation potential areas and understand how this fits into Article 6 transactions and narrative. I will start with just a final comment to say that, as we've seen in South Africa, not all opportunities for private sector involvement in a Paris Agreement context will require corresponding adjustments. And we need to continue to work with governments in the continent to monitor potential carbon pricing schemes in Africa in the future that will create demand for domestic mitigation outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for that. We now have Rachel online. She was actually meant to be our first speaker, but thank you, Rachel, for joining us. Yeah, I hope the connection, you can hear us just fine. And because of time, I'll ask Michael to just go straight in after as well. But Rachel, you have 5 minutes to explain the experiences of Côte d'Ivoire. And for Michael, I think I'll just pose your question right now as well. How can African governments and private sector benefit from the CLIC Foundation? I think when we had James speaking, he mentioned how we need an incentive, to actually get into some of these projects. So I hope you can expand a bit on that with your presentation on CLIC. But Rachel, you have the floor, 5 minutes. Thank you. Kindly unmute. We can't hear you. Yeah. Great. Still can't hear you. Maybe try unplugging the headset. I don't know if it will help. Okay, I'll give the floor to Michael while we try and sort it out in the background, if that's all right. Because I can't. Yes. So, yes. So, Michael, if you can please kindly go ahead and tell us more about CLIC.
Sure. Thank you very much, Bianca, and thank you for inviting me to this webinar. I'm very happy to speak here about the CLIC Foundation's Itmo procurement program that we are running now for around 2 years. By way of introduction, the CLIC Foundation is an organization fulfilling the obligation of mineral oil importers under the Swiss CO2 Act to offset most of the emissions caused by the use of fossil fuels in Switzerland. So we are not a governmental entity, we're not an agency of the government, but a private entity. So how do we do that? How do we fulfill our compliance obligation? Well, we procure Itmos generated through international greenhouse gas mitigation activities under Article 6, currently under Article 6.2, but we would be open to go for Article 6.4 activities, but basically there's no basis for that at the moment. Switzerland will then use the Itmos we procure towards its NDC emission reduction target. So now, how do we procure these Itmos? Well, we do so-called calls for proposals. We have conducted so far 2 of these calls to procure these suitable mitigation activity proposals from the private sector and the governmental sector. In these 2 call for proposals, we have received so far 26 proposals from African countries, including from Senegal, Ghana, Morocco, Malawi, and Ethiopia. A 3rd call for proposals is currently running, and we expect to receive more activities from African countries. Well, the activities we support offer many advantages to governments and the private sector. I want to mention 4 of them. First of all, well, the mitigation activities we finance and from which we purchase Itmos from, they have to be designed in a way that they create new markets, they create new jobs in fossil technology and know-how transfer in the host country. In addition, the criteria we apply in the selection process provides for the requirement that our activities need to provide highest social and environmental co-benefits to the local population. So that's one advantage that holds for the government and for the private sector, or the population of the country. Now, we furthermore support, well, financially and by other means, the design and the implementation of the mitigation activities we select. We thereby work together with the government, with the authorities, to establish the relevant governmental processes and the awareness within the relevant ministries. Thirdly, our programs are designed to allow the continued operation beyond the sale of the Itmos to the CLIC Foundation. So we select activities that generate income besides the revenues from the Itmo sale. So that means, and we want to ensure with that the greenhouse gas reductions achieved by these ongoing activities can be used by the host country to meet its future NDC target beyond 2030, simply because each activity has the capability to continue operation. For example, we saw many projects in landfill gas projects, landfill gas flaring projects. I personally saw many of them in Latin America. They simply stopped operation when the CER revenues or the ERPAs stopped. And that's a pity, and we don't want to happen with our activities. Now, finally, the activities we support, they can be used as a blueprint by governments. That's an advantage for the governments. They can use all the knowledge and all the processes established for further activities with Switzerland or with other countries. So these are, in our point of view, 4 important advantages our CLIC Itmo procurement program provides to governments and private sector. What experience have we made so far? Well, very exciting ones and very promising ones. We talked to several project developers and authorities in all African countries we are engaged with. We see a lot of enthusiasm, interest, and willingness to move ahead quickly, well, on the Swiss side and on the host country side. We meet very pragmatic and proactive people that make these activities happen, hopefully soon. Now, at this point, I would like to mention the milestone we achieved yesterday when the implementing agreement, the bilateral agreement between Ghana and Switzerland was signed. That's a really big milestone. This agreement will kind of legally govern our activities, our investments in Ghana. It is the first agreement of its kind in Africa. And we hope that many more such agreements will be signed soon between Switzerland and other African countries. Well, we now at the CLIC Foundation, we look very much forward to scale up now our engagements in Ghana and intensify our excellent working relationship with the respective authorities. And there I would like I'm happy to inform you as well that the tender, we have just launched a tender for the development of the National Clean Energy Program in Ghana, which is kind of a platform that should efficiently manage the implementation and operation of hopefully a variety of different mitigation activities under Article 6 in Ghana. I don't go into detail about this project, but refer you to our website where this program is described, and the terms of reference for participating in the tender is available. Well, however, there are, of course, a lot of challenges, and many of these challenges have been mentioned before. The main one is, for sure, the lack of regulatory framework for Article 6, the rulebook, which is still missing, and basically the complexity of the mechanism itself. That makes it very difficult for governments to take a proactive approach, I would say, simply because nobody knows exactly how it will work, and to convince somebody in an administration to take measures without knowing where it's heading at, that's absolutely difficult. Well, processes and cross-ministerial committees need to be established at governmental level to authorize and manage the activities. It is not like CDM, a private sector-driven exercise or mechanism. It's governmentally driven. So under this implementing agreement, the transaction of it must take place. The commercial part, of course, is covered by the commercial entities, Click Foundation and the project owner. But at the end, for a transfer of Itmo, you need the involvement of both governments, Switzerland and the host country. And to establish all these processes and the knowledge within the ministries, that's a tremendous work which lies ahead of us. We're doing our best to support, but basically there is lack of know-how, definitely. Not only in the host countries, but in Switzerland as well. For project developers, well, we understand that there are a lot of challenges. Well, when you develop an idea, you submit it to the Click Foundation without knowing whether or not it will pay out, right? Due to political and commercial uncertainties. That's a risk. That's a lot of risk which has to be absorbed. We are doing our best at the Click Foundation to take out as much risk for the private sector as possible. But, and as a final remark, I would like to mention that there are and there will be risks for all of us when implementing Article 6 activities, for the private sector, for the Click Foundation, and for the governments. But there are also revenues and rewards that can be earned, perhaps not today, but tomorrow. And what we need, in our point of view, we need courageous governments and private actors, basically to bring the Article 6 mechanism to life. I stop here. Thank you very much for your attention. I remain available for questions. Over to you, Bianca.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I'd now like to open up the floor for a Q&A session. And as we wait for some questions, I think I'll just summarize basically from what I've been hearing from all the speakers. Of course, those are significant milestones with the bilateral agreements being done. It's a huge example for Africa to look towards Ghana and see what was actually entailed in doing that process. But I think what we can see from this is that it expounds on the issues that Patrick was talking about on how to do corresponding adjustments and how the innovative ways countries are trying to think about what to do in this area. So there's definitely ways to learn from each other. And as Dr. Mambia mentioned, she had there's an interministerial committee that has been set up that has, not only government, but private sector entities as well, something that James said is also really important to have that dialogue between private and government sectors involved. So I think I would just like to pose a very simple question to James and Patrick in terms of policy, since you do agree that there needs to be close collaboration with government. What exactly would you need to see in policy to create that incentive for the private sector and to make work easier for you moving forward? Yeah. So I just open the floor to Patrick and to James for one question.
Okay. I mean, from my side, I think what one would like to see is a situation where, starting from conceptualization of how you look at some of the activities going forward, is to get the private sector involved, because in the end, when you're going to be interacting with projects, the actual project proponents, you will need the project, you need the private sector to drive this process. And hence, it's very important that you carry, we carry the private sector along right from the onset. Because when you go for all these preparation and you have all these policies put in place, and then we take out or we forget the private sector, who's going to be the driver, then it becomes an issue. I cite an example for you. I mean, I'm going to cite an example. A project was rejected in the country, and it was rejected in the country in the days of CDM. Why? Because it couldn't, there wasn't a proper way of metering out a type of gas that shouldn't be added into what you can claim credits for. And the developer, being the first project, it's kind of doing this innocently, but there was no proper guidance as to how this can be done, coming from the private sector part of it, or coming from a kind of synergy that comes from the those who are the will-be expert, I mean the experts and the people carrying out this project. So it became an issue and it was thrown out. So I like to see a kind of synergy put in place right from the policy framework that allows or sort of identifies who are the players in this sector, and then can be put together such that they are reckoned with in putting these processes together. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sorry, my computer is playing over. No, and for me, of course, you know, it is difficult at this time for everyone, and that is valid for public and private sector alike, to deal with the uncertainties and risk that an unwritten or unfinalized Article 6 article bring. So I think what we have discussed today is that, of course, there needs to be a dialogue, and so far in most countries, I can see that this dialogue has started and that various committees have been set up, and there's a dialogue that is facilitated by government entities. But of course, we need to do more, and we need to do more faster. We know that to meet NDC targets and to increase climate ambition and climate action over time, the private sector needs to be involved on the ground, because the private sector can deliver at scale where the government resources, in most cases, will be constrained. And in certain areas, in certain sectors, this is fairly easy to identify. We need to make sure that the government is going to allow private sector innovation to come in and improve the overall future prospects of a country within any given sector. And in the past, when you had the CDM, of course, there was no restriction when it came to the carbon side of things to bring in the financing and act as the value carrier. But now with the Paris Agreement and the government having to meet a certain target, there is more reticence in obviously acknowledging and accepting a wider array of projects. So what we would want to see is to ensure that this potential bottleneck is clarified. It is clear that for any given sector, X amount of funding is expected to come from the private sector to meet the target, and that this will be facilitated with improved capacity on the government side to allow that to happen, be it with a commitment to provide corresponding adjustments or otherwise. Because of course, we have delivered a lot of wonderful impact on the ground when it comes to energy efficiency in particular, and some sectors where you have the lowest hanging fruits of climate action still remain in the energy sector, in the transportation sector, and in the land use and land use management sectors. This is where private sector cannot be kept silent and has to see an opportunity to get involved without the risks that are going to be created within an Article 6 framework of not getting access to the carbon benefits and mitigation outcomes that are created by their projects. So to facilitate that would be amazing.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Yeah, very practical examples. I will take one last question before we wrap up the Q&A, and there's a question that has been directed to Michael. So there's a question here on, Michael, thank you and congratulations in the success in Ghana. What recommendation can you give the Eastern African region to replicate the success? What needs to be in place in terms of institutional setups, but also with regard to the private sector? Also, does CLIC have priority sectors for cooperation?
Okay, well, thank you for that question. I start with the second one, priority sectors. Well, there are some sectors excluded, like we don't do forestry, we don't do anything related to nuclear energy, and we don't do energy efficiency with a fossil fuel lock-in. So where you use replace maybe as an example crude oil with natural gas, for example. But the rest actually is open. So the only thing we're really picky is that we will not want to crowd out measures to be taken by the government itself. So when you look at the at an NTC, we will not invest into projects or programs which are part of the unconditional part of the NTC. But the rest is basically open. We're very much interested in receiving innovative project proposals. Now, what is needed in terms of institutional setup? Right. When we talk about the connection with governments from host countries, there must be some sort of knowledge about Article 6. There must be, and we require that very early in the process, there must be an understanding of corresponding adjustments. There must be the willingness to accept or or enter into talks with the government about the application of corresponding adjustments. That's key, and that's a must criteria, which is where there's no way around that. So what governments should have is a clear view of whether and how they want to do the corresponding adjustments for the Itmo sold to us. Does that answer your question? And the Eastern African countries. I mean, we are very happy to engage with all type with all countries in Africa. So the bilateral, the implementing agreement with Ghana should be publicly available, so everybody can see what it requires. So we can only refer you to the Swiss government, that all countries willing to talk about such an agreement as signed with Ghana can simply approach the Swiss government. I can give you the email address of the responsible person, and it's a straightforward process. Just approach the guys in Bern, and they will start the talks about this bilateral agreement.
Great, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you everyone for participating today. I hope you did manage to get quite a few takeaways from the government and private sector and CLIC, the speakers here today. And I'd like to say once again, thank you to the West Africa Alliance and the I4C team for collaborating to put on this event. And I will now hand over to Paula, who will now take us through the end of the close of the session. But once again, yeah, so anything, just let us know.
Great. Thank you, Bianca, for the moderation. And I'd like to thank all the speakers who spoke today for a fruitful discussion. If you have any questions, please email us at innovateforclimate@worldbank.org, and feel free to visit our website for the recording of this webinar. Once again, thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.